Did you know white phosphorus came out of urine? In 1669, an alchemist in Hamburg boiled down about 5,500 liters of urine, hoping to get gold out of it. He got no gold. He got 60 grams of a substance that glowed in the dark all by itself. His name was Hennig Brand. He had been a merchant, he went broke, and he took up alchemy the way plenty of ruined men did in those years. What he was after was the philosopher's stone, the way of turning anything into gold. His reasoning was his own, and by 17th century standards it was not the stupidest. Urine is yellow, gold is yellow, so there must be gold in urine, and the job is getting it out. He collected the urine by the bucket, with arrangements at barracks and taverns. He needed more of it than one man produces in a lifetime. Then he let it stand for weeks until it rotted, boiled it down to a thick sludge, and roasted the sludge in a sealed pot with no air. It was long work, and it stank. His neighbors cannot have enjoyed it. Out of a whole barrel came a handful, 60 grams from 5,500 liters. That handful, though, behaved like nothing before it. It glowed. A steady, pale green light. No flame and no sparks. And you could hold it in your hand. Brand named it with a word meaning light-bearer. For the 17th century, this was a miracle. There were exactly 3 glowing things a person could know back then: fire, rotting wood in a forest, and fireflies. That was the list. And now there was a lump that glowed for months, burned nothing, and did not scorch you. No wonder Brand decided he had found something close to the stone itself. After that, he behaved like a businessman. He kept the recipe to himself, showed the substance for money, and sold the method of making it. He sold it at least twice. One of the buyers toured Europe with it and demonstrated it at royal courts. People paid for the chance to stand in a dark room and look at a glowing lump. A few years later, an English chemist reproduced the whole thing and published a description. From that point, white phosphorus traveled around the laboratories of Europe, and for a century and a half, it stayed an expensive curiosity. It was shown at courts, carried in sealed glass tubes, used to write glowing letters on walls. It had no use at all beyond astonishment. What changed things at the end of the 18th century was thoroughly dull. 2 Swedish chemists found that phosphorus sits in bone and worked out how to get it from bone ash. That sounds like a footnote. It is the turning point of the whole story. Bones are lying around every slaughterhouse, and they cost almost nothing. The substance stopped being a marvel from a barrel and became a raw material you could make by the ton. The price collapsed. Now about phosphorus itself, because the rest makes no sense without it. It catches fire on its own, with no match and no spark. 34 degrees is enough, which is the temperature of a human hand. So it is stored underwater, and it still is today. The glow is a separate thing. It is slow oxidation in air, a cold light with no flame, pretty and completely harmless looking. Those 2 properties together are what made the whole history. A substance that ignites from any warmth turned out to be perfect for setting something alight on purpose. But first you have to understand how people lived without matches. Fire in the house was work. In the morning, the woman of the house raked the ashes, looking for a coal left from the night before. If there was no coal, out came the flint and the tinder. And if the house had neither, fire had to be carried. Literally, somebody walked across the street with a glowing coal in an iron scoop, shielding it from the wind with one hand. Flint and steel means a piece of steel and a piece of stone. You strike one against the other, a spark flies, it lands on the tinder starts to smolder, and then you blow it into flame. In dry weather with good tinder, that is a minute. In damp weather, it is 10 minutes and a bad mood. So fire was hoarded. The stove was kept hot around the clock. If it did go out, you went to the neighbors with a scoop for coals. It was an ordinary neighborly thing, like borrowing salt. The first friction match was made by an English chemist in 1826. There was no phosphorus in it yet, and it lit badly. Then in 1830, a Frenchman put white phosphorus in the head. That is where everything turned. A match like that lit on anything: a wall, a boot, your own trousers. It cost pennies because the amount of phosphorus in a head was tiny. For the first time in history, fire became a thing you carry in your pocket. Not produced, not hoarded, not borrowed from a neighbor. Carried and taken out when needed. More came out of that than you would think. A cheap match means a lamp you light whenever you want, which means an evening you can actually do something with. It means a stove lit when you need it, rather than nursed since dawn. And it means smoking became a mass habit right then, because before that, lighting up in the street was a project. Matches were soon made in the billions. By the end of the century, England alone was turning them out by the tens of billions a year. A new problem arrived with them. A match that lights on anything also lights on its own if it gets knocked about in a pocket. Fires started by matches became their own line in city statistics. And here, the second half of the story begins. Match heads were dipped by hand. The factories ran on women and girls, often from the age of 14, working 14-hour days. They sat over open vats of hot phosphorus paste and breathed the fumes for the whole shift. Phosphorus fumes destroy the bone of the jaw. It starts with toothache, and then the bone stops healing. The only treatment in those years was surgical, and it meant losing part of the jaw. The condition had one sign that gave it away instantly. In the dark, the affected bone glowed faintly, the same cold light that had astonished Brand. The women knew the risk. The factory paid, and there was no other work nearby. The owners knew too. They held on to white phosphorus to the last because it was cheap. In 1888, a London journalist wrote about it. The article was called White Slavery in London, and it carried the numbers, what the women were paid, what they were fined, what was taken off them for being late. The factory responded by demanding that the workers sign a statement denying it. They refused. One was dismissed. And then 1,400 people walked out of that factory. The strike lasted 3 weeks, and the women won. The fines were abolished, the pay went up, the dining room was separated from the workshop. In England, it became an event people talked about for years. It is worth saying who did this. Not a union, not a party, not Parliament. 1,500 young factory workers with no backing simply walked out of the gates and stayed out until the owners agreed. White phosphorus stayed in matches anyway. And this is the most interesting part of the whole story. The safety match already existed by then. It had existed for more than 40 years. The idea was simple. Take the phosphorus out of the head and move it to the box. And use red phosphorus, which is not poisonous and does not ignite on its own. A match like that only lights on its own striking surface. A Swede got it working in 1844, and his countrymen had it in production by 1855. It was safe, it was convenient, and nobody wanted it. The reason is plain. Red phosphorus cost more. The match cost more. And a buyer in a shop picked the cheaper one and never asked who had paid for the difference. For 40 years, free consumer choice worked against the safe match. Every side knew about the disease, and every side knew about the fix. It ended with a ban. The market did not solve it. In 1906, several countries signed an agreement in Bern and prohibited white phosphorus in matches. England joined 2 years later. America did not ban it. America did something simpler. In 1912, matches made with white phosphorus were taxed so heavily that making them stopped being worth it. Within a year, nobody was making them. Just before that came the thing I still find the most decent act in this entire history. The largest match company in the country held the patent on the safe formula. The president asked them to give the patent up so that everyone could use it. The company released it for nothing. So the way out had not only been invented, it had been handed to the competition. And even after that, it took a tax. Now where phosphorus is today. It is in you. Phosphorus is in your bones, in your teeth, and in every cell of your body. And no muscle works without it. An adult carries around 700 grams of it, which is more than 10 times what Brand pulled out of his barrel. It is in your food. Phosphate fertilizer feeds roughly half of humanity, and there is nothing to replace it with. Phosphorus cannot be synthesized. It can only be dug up, and it cannot be dug up everywhere. More than 2/3 of the world's reserves of the ore sit in one country. Everybody else buys. That is the difference between phosphorus and, say, nitrogen. Nitrogen is taken straight out of the air, where there is nearly 4/5 of it. Phosphorus lies in the ground in particular places, and when those places run out, there is nowhere else to get it. Here's what I think about this story. We tend to assume dangerous things get banned once the harm is understood. Here, it went the other way round. The disease was known for half a century. The safe replacement sat on the shelf for 40 years, and nothing changed while the price difference favored the dangerous option. Chemistry did not fix the match. Chemistry was finished in 1844. The law fixed the match. And in America, the law did not even prohibit anything. It just made the thing unprofitable. A word on the military use, briefly, because this video is not about it. Armies noticed early what a substance that sets everything alight is good for, and they still use it. That is a separate and heavy subject with its own treaties and its own arguments. And one last thing. The box sitting in your kitchen is built exactly the way they worked it out back then. Red phosphorus on the side of the box, not in the head. A century and a half has passed, and the design has not changed. Every time you strike a match, you are repeating a decision that was made because of the jaws of a few thousand women in London. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe. There's plenty more coming. See you next time.